Welcome to Everything All Right, where the most amazing authors talk about the best books. And my guest today is the lovely Louise Fein, who presents her new novel, The London Bookshop Affair. It's really, there it is. And I love the cover. I actually love the green of her coat. I love the expression of her face. And equally, the bookshop, it looks as a bookshop should in London of the 1960s. And it's really such a riveting read on historical fiction at its finest. And I really got London in the 60s completely, sort of the grim weather and the greasy food and the sad housing and the little life there was, and two fantastic heroines. So welcome, Louise.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. And yes, I absolutely love this cover. It's probably one of my favorite, I think, just because it's in a bookshop. So,
So tell us a little more in a sort of in a nutshell. What is the book about?
so the main part of the book, as you say, is set in the early 1960s, 1962, and it's a story of Celia, who is just an ordinary girl. She's grown up in South London and she works in a bookshop, which she loves. She loves books, but it's the beginning of the 60s and she wants a career, but she hasn't got any qualifications. So she's sort of stuck in this dusty old bookshop. And then one day, her best friend, who works in a solicitor's office, comes across a file and she finds something out about her family history, which kind of changes everything for her. I won't give away what that is. At the same time, one of the customers who comes into the shop is an American, a handsome American who seems to take a shine to her. And he works at the American embassy. And that is also another defining moment of her life. And it sort of all spirals from there, where she gets caught up in some secrets of the past. And also it is a time of the Cold War in London, well, in the Western world, where all kinds of underhand things are going on, and all based on real true stories. I can't give too much away. It's actually a really hard book to talk
I mean,
about.
it sounds absolutely titillating. So how much is fact and how much is fiction? For instance, it's very clever that you bring in that handsome American, because I think your books have been doing extremely well in Canada and the US. So it's very cunning of you. But so how do you do your research? Tell us about that.
So actually, that character is fictional, but he is partly based on a real person. He's fictional in the sense that he works at the American embassy, which the real character did not. But I needed him to be close to the American ambassador. That's why he works there. So basically, a lot of it is based on fact, but I have changed elements. So people's names have been changed, and I have brought together, I've slightly shifted timelines, and I've brought together things that didn't happen in reality, but a lot of it is fact, and that is set out in my author's note at the back of the book, because when I read historical fiction, I always want to know what's real and what isn't. So I've made that quite clear at the back of the book.
Yes, yeah, no, that's very important, the author's note. And the acknowledgements, I'm always surprised how many people actually really read the acknowledgements and sort of look for the names and they go, I know that person, or that's very important to be named there. And so your book's set in the 1960s, but it links back to the Second World War, and your first two novels are both set in World War II as well. How do you explain people's fascination for that era, which is huge in historical fiction?
Yeah, so actually my first, but neither of my first two novels are set in the Second World War. But the first one is set in the 1930s, so it is literally about the build up to the Second World War. And my first book is actually set in 1920s England, but again it has elements which come to the fore in the Second World War. I think the 20th century is so overshadowed by the two wars that it's hard to write 20th century fiction without it being reflected somehow in our novels. I suppose one of the enduring fascinations with war fiction is people are being put in incredibly difficult situations, and it's always, how would you be if you were in that character's shoes? What would you do? It is, I think, one of the things that makes it enduring, and some of the hardships that people put up with and overcame is quite inspiring. I don't know how long that will go on for, but it certainly seems to be something that doesn't go away. In this particular book, it's only a small part. There are 5 little threads that come from the Second World War, and it's not even so much about the war. It's just the characters were able to be in a situation because of the war, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And you describe actually these very difficult situations, as you say, even though they're just these little threads, really well, as much as of the dreams and the aspirations. And what did you find the hardest and what did you find the easiest to write?
Oh, goodness. That's a really tough question. I think, do you mean which thread did I find easiest to
Yes,
write?
exactly. Yeah.
I don't know, actually. I think I found the 1960s easier to write about in terms of it being more accessible, more relatable, perhaps. But I do know a lot about the Second World War period. So from a research perspective, I think that was maybe a little bit easier. And it's a smaller chunk of the book. But what I found fascinating, which affected both timelines, was the way that during the war, and this is another reason I think for World War fiction being popular, is during the war, women were able to fulfill roles that were unavailable to them in peacetime. And so I think it was really interesting to explore kind of the change in attitude towards what a woman was and should be doing during war and during peacetime.
Yes,
As well.
war really, the 2 wars really propelled Europe into modern times, and especially for women. But let's go way back. So, how did you get into writing?
So I've always wanted to be a writer, like many authors. I dreamed of being a writer as a child. I was always a big bookworm, and I used to staple my stories together at the age of 7. They were always pony stories. I've moved on a bit.
I like pony stories.
Um, but then, it was never sort of on my radar as a career. It was always something I felt was you should do in your spare time. So I went off, I became a lawyer, I had a family, time got short. And then when I had my 3rd child, unfortunately, she became quite unwell when she was little, and I had to cut back on work. And that was when I did a master's in creative writing. And I'd had this idea for the novel that did become my debut. For about 10 years, it had been floating around in my mind. And it was the impetus that made me start that novel. And that was the one that did become my debut. It took me 5 years, but it got there in the end.
Yeah, but a good MA, of course, takes time, as does a good novel. And did that MA help you then find an agent as well? What was it like for you?
So, well, the MA actually only took a year. It was the 5 years that it took me to write the book. I thought I could do it in a year, but I couldn't. I did a lot of rewriting, and not really. I mean, the MA obviously helped me to write a better book, and sort of I learned, writers' techniques, etc. But it took another sort of 3 years after I'd finished that course to get an agent, and I just did it by going on the slush pile. Like many other people, I didn't know anyone in the industry, so I just sent it out and hoped for the best, and I just got lucky, in that, I got a lot of rejections like we all do, but I did get an agent, so yes.
And a very good one. So, who inspires your writing? Whom do you like to read for ideas?
I read very, very widely. Some of my favorite authors are people like Kate Atkinson, Maggie O'Farrell. I read contemporary as well as historical fiction. I also love crime and thriller, so I read quite a lot from all genres really, and I think that all feeds a little bit into my writing. So other people have said, there are sort of thriller elements to my stories, so I suppose that all comes in.
Could you imagine sort of writing full on under a different name and a different voice and genre, like sort of becoming a psychological suspense writer? Or
Well, possibly. I have got an idea for a sort of dystopian novel, which I have written a little bit of, but it's been shelved. So you never know, that might come out of the drawer sometime. We shall see. But yeah, it's definitely something I would consider. I mean, when I went into writing, I didn't really understand how the industry worked. So I didn't think, oh, I'm going to become a historical novelist. I just had this idea for my book without realizing that then once you've written a historical novel, you sort of carry on writing historical novels because that's what is expected. So yes, I would definitely consider writing different genres.
and tell us a little bit about your writing days. Are there any must-haves?
Coffee.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Good.
And my sort of routine is obviously get my youngest is still at school, so get her off to school, and then, well, when I haven't got a broken leg, I I walk the dog. That's the thing that usually gets my sort of brain thinking about what I'm going to be writing that day. I can't do that at the moment. So what I find I do, which is not ideal, is I sort of have a look on the internet for a bit. So that's become my new thing. I can't actually start writing until I've done a bit of internet surfing. Um, and then yeah, I try and write. I'm best writing in the morning, so lots of coffee, a few breaks, but I try and get 1,000 words done a day, ideally, for 5 days a week. And then yeah, in the afternoon, if I've got any time, it tends to be sort of a bit of editing or doing some social media stuff or whatever. And then yeah, end of the day is the end of the school day for me.
Yes, yeah. I think that's sort of the same for for a lot of us. And what is next for you? What are you working on? Another historical fiction? As you
I
say, as is expected.
Yes, I am working on another historical novel, which won't be out until spring 2026. That sounds so long away, but I have to deliver the book in December, so it's not that long away. And this one, I can't say too much about it, but it is another dual timeline novel. Um, and it's a big change for me because part of it is set in 1552 and part of it is set in 1953. So very different timelines. There is something that joins them together, but it's partly set in Paris, partly set in London, partly set in the US. So it's kind of quite a lot of research I've had to do for this one.
I love the sound of that one, and I'll look out for it, definitely. So we've already come to the end of our talk on the five faves. So Louise, very, very quickly, what's your favorite movie?
Oh, my favorite movie is, oh, my brain has gone totally blank. I would say a good historical movie. Well, can I have a TV series, something like Downton
Okay.
Abbey?
Yeah,
I'll have that.
Don Abbey. Okay, favorite book
Favorite book, probably Pride and Prejudice.
and favorite music or score or song?
Um, Favorite song. I absolutely love jazz music. So anything jazzy that I will write to a bit of sort of background jazz music.
Favorite food?
Pasta.
And a favorite travel destination?
Italy.
Yeah, well, that goes together. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for watching Everything All Right. My guest today was Louise Fein, and we spoke about her beautiful novel, The London Bookshop Affair. Order it online or get it at the local independent bookstore, which is so much better. I'm Ellen Alpsten. Subscribe to Everything All Right and come and watch us next week. Thank you so much, Louise.
Thank you so much, Ellen. It's been a pleasure.